Hey you. So, my goal with this video is to help people recognize and understand the nature of a freemium business model in the context of video games, as well as expand on some of the tactics and monetization strategies employed by them. I feel that there are some cases where this model is a success and is employed in a manner that is respectful of the consumer and their time. But in others, I feel that it is used in the same way that our global economy is in part directly reliant on people continuing to be financially uneducated or illiterate regarding some of the strategies employed by various companies, which often prey on that very same illiteracy, which is, as they say, there's a sucker born every minute. I would also add that this video is narrowly focused on the freemium business model in video games. There are a variety of tangential subjects and focal points that were skipped or not mentioned at all here. Frankly, I have a bad habit of being unable to summarize my thoughts well, so I didn't mention everything, but I did try to cover things in an organized fashion, I think. So, what is it? What exactly is a freemium model in video games? Generally, this type of model is where a company will offer two or more different types of pricing tiers for all of its products and services within a game, one of which is free. And so, the goal of any freemium model is to attract as many customers as possible by having a very low entry fee. In this case, it's free. And by having a large customer base, you have the chance to convert a significant percentage of these users into paying ones. This is often called the land and expand model to some degree, because if you land customers with the low entry or freemium offer, you can then later expand with premium offers. For example, Path of Exile is a freemium game that has no upfront cost, but it employs a variety of strategies in order to remain profitable through their premium offerings. So, what are some of the advantages of a freemium model? Well, typically player adoption and the low cost of entry, as I mentioned, for the consumer, but the decision to try is usually a fairly easy one for the consumer when they no longer have to consider price as part of the factors required to play, and it instead relies more on other features and offerings within the game as a barrier to entry in some cases. So, another advantage are the free offerings within the game itself, which can often be leveraged as an additional marketing tool for all of the premium offerings. This is because, like many modern video games, you'll often see the free rewards and services in the same space as the premium offerings. So, for example, a game that says that you can build something that might take 1 hour for free or longer, but you can pay 25 gems to do it instantly. The display of that information is usually always present or made clear to you, front and center, reminding you. Or, you're progressing through a battle pass, which is a linearly tiered progression system, and can at times have both free and paid rewards. And you'll usually also see the displayed version of the premium rewards alongside that same progression system, advertising to you what you're missing out on at all times, and the very system itself you're forced to interact with as part of the game itself, so it's difficult to avoid. Sometimes it can directly correlate to an in-game value, saying things like saving 800%, which would be outrageous if you were to skip. This can also be called FOMO, or the fear of missing out. This can also present itself in many other forms, but this is just an example. One last advantage is that it can help companies reduce their overall acquisition costs for customers compared to other more traditional marketing methods. More on this later. So, why would a company choose this route? Well, honestly, there are a variety of reasons, but in most cases, this is usually only successful when the costs of production are quite low and have minimally fixed costs associated with the development pipeline, which can usually be offset by the generally small percentage of players as a whole that choose to spend money within the game. This can change gradually to some degree, depending on the success of the game and how it grows. But another issue that the company might face choosing this route is how to continue to be successful in the long term. This can present itself in a variety of ways, but it can be remedied by some of the following, like frequent patches, compelling narrative, expansions, new features in the game, social structures, and other premium offerings, etc. But in general, providing an experience to a player that they feel is worth the investment of their time and isn't perceived as being wasted is absolutely key here. The more time a player can spend within a game equals more opportunities for a company that they can use to advertise to you. More on this later. In many cases, a company may only successfully convert less than 10% of the player base into paying customers within this model, and many games will lose nearly 75% of its player base within the first year, or more, without some of the aforementioned innovations I mentioned before. The market is flooded with other opportunities for consumers. And so this is where conversion becomes a key and critical role in the freemium business model. And so, what are some ways that companies might approach conversion? As I stated earlier, lowering the acquisition costs is a huge goal for many companies. Marketing can be a fairly complex subject and can end up being used ineffectively with the wrong approaches or environments. But typically, a lot of it revolves around creating a cycle of behavior for consumers to be just like cattle. We can probably explore a few. This is a subject known as consumer marketing theories, but in general, they can come in the form of what many call a purchase funnel, which is a concept pioneered by Elmo Lewis, which essentially states that the process that every consumer must go through before making any purchase. In essence, a purchase funnel follows these rules. So, first, you must provide awareness of the product or service. Second, you must then generate interest for the player to potentially purchase. And third, you then need to build a desire for the player. And finally, provide the action in which allows them to fill that desire. So first, let's talk about the awareness portion. This can often be seen in a variety of ways. Games that provide a shared space or open world can also provide an opportunity to see a cool character wearing this unique armor that glows or wielding a weapon that you've never seen before. This can also come through the user interface systems or graphical portion that a player is forced to interact with, such as when a player logs into the game, the first thing they see is this premium offering or an advertisement. This is often called an interstitial ad, which are full-screen advertisements that immediately break up the psychology of the player and what their expectation was by interrupting them for a short period of time, in some cases drawing their attention, but in most it's just annoying. Then there's the interest portion of the purchase funnel. This can often be driven by the aforementioned concept of awareness. Now that the player is made aware, this can often translate into interest. This can usually take shape through campaigns, new content, features, screenshots, trials, or demos, allowing the player to try new armor on or see how it might look. Seeing another player run around in town looking completely different from anything else that's earnable or achievable in the game. And this is where desire comes into play. And it is ultimately the metaphorical edge that many players find themselves teetering over time and time again. This is because the tactics utilized here are often so diverse and complex that we often do not see the ledge until it is too late. As mentioned earlier, this is where many of the not-so-friendly systems come into play, such as the fear of missing out. This can come in the form of limited time offers or special events and a variety of other elements, sometimes pressuring you to make a decision. This can also be driven by accolades or even mechanics within the game itself. For example, this is where companies will often create systems and progressions in the game that alter the player experience to a point to where it can also motivate the desire to pay for convenience or ease of access within the game. This can also translate to directly depreciating the overall product and gameplay experience. This is a pretty in-depth subject, and it has its own complexities, so I might create a video about this topic perhaps later in the future. But the final step in this purchase funnel is action itself. After the player has already been made aware, has become interested, and is now filled with a desire to purchase, the action of purchasing is all that is left. However, in many cases, purchasing or the act of purchasing is an opportunity for companies to positively reinforce that cycle by making it very easy to do so. This can often come across as flashing lights, positive sounds, bright colors, or anything else that draws a psychological association to a positive reinforcement as a direct correlation to the action of purchasing. And ideally, throughout this whole purchase funnel process, companies want players to be telling their friends when they're not playing the game about something cool that they got, and the creation of social spaces just become another advertisement for interactivity and feedback loops regarding the premium offerings. This can be similar to when you're waiting around in town or a common gathering place within the game, and players can feel empowered because they purchased something that is unique and stands out and far exceeds things that can be earnable in the game. This also feeds back into the purchase funnel once again, because these new premium items have now made new potential purchasers aware and possibly interested or filled with a desire to purchase. It is important to note, though, that at every step in this purchase funnel system, you can lose customers, but companies have spent millions on improving this system and figuring out ways to limit this loss. Eventually, the purchase funnel model has been slimmed down into a more modern approach and is now usually referred to as something or in the capacity of the ARM model, or the ARM, which stands for Acquisition, Retention, and Monetization. I won't bore you with further details, but I'm sure you can extrapolate the meaning behind the acronym in some areas. The only real difference here is that the ARM model adds in the need to reinvest your profits and revenue to further feed your acquisitions, and those same acquisitions are then used to generate awareness for new viral sources. How does the freemium model impact video game development? Without going into great detail, a quick overview of the freemium model has a few key tenets that it rests on: maintaining a large set of users for initial or longer-term stages, due to there being no cost associated with trying the game out at the start, and ensuring that the company creates a clear delineation between what premium and free users have access to, such as upgraded features, ease of access, increased storage, separate content, or perhaps customizations with additional customer service options. All of which leads me to this final section. Much of the aforementioned systems and features within the freemium model employ a variety of tactics that, when they're being utilized, many of them cannot be haphazardly implemented in a game without some kind of forethought. This means that the aspect of monetization is often directly integral to the approach of game design and development itself. This can have very far-reaching impacts throughout all aspects of game development. Many games might feel sluggish or progression might feel slowed. This is because the game might offer a premium service that will expedite that system, or perhaps their approach could be that the more time you spend in the game, the more chances the company has to create a behavioral pattern that might lead you to purchase something. In some cases, this is also used to meet the expected expansion or update cadence pattern that the company is currently trying to follow. If players have nothing else to do, they won't be playing the game and thus no longer being advertised to or purchasing items, so they deliberately slow down progression. Some games might continually introduce a new currency or an object that takes up an ever-decreasing amount of player inventory space, which is used as a tactic to further incentivize the player to purchase additional storage space. But it is often explained away or intertwined with inventory management as a mechanic within the game. Other games might offer a very dullard customization system, such as armor and effects, only to further incentivize players' need to self-actualize by purchasing premium offerings that have clearly been created in a manner that enforces that cycle of behavior or that aspect of psychology. Some games might have a free player essentially standing in a social space or a town with what looks like a bucket on your head and a ragged potato sack for armor, even though your gear is near endgame quality. But you end up standing near another player who might be level 1 and just starting out, and they look like the blazing glory itself, with wings and special effects galore. There are so many other examples of how monetization in games have directly impacted the very nature of game development itself in our modern age. It's important to recognize that monetization, in general, isn't something that is solely impacting certain industries or avenues. These are trained behaviors that are constantly advertised to us as consumers, such as Black Fridays, Thanksgiving events and sales, limited time offers, commercials between content breaks, sounds, lights. There are even songs for commercials that many of us simply can't forget because they're so catchy. Ultimately, repetition and psychology are key, and many people are already subject to these behavioral patterns since birth. They have simply been integrated into game design and monetization within this industry. As I mentioned before, it is a lengthy subject in my mind, and perhaps we'll explore some of these topics at a later time. So, in closing, I believe that history is the only thing that allows humanity to move forward. It is the recorded record of our failures and events that allows us to reflect on our past and hope to strive for a better future. But history has also shown us that we don't always learn from our mistakes, and that in many cases we are often destined to repeat them. Many of these systems continue to succeed and push the boundary of what is consumer-centric and fair, because the one thing that companies rely on is that over time, there will be less and less people that remember what games used to be like. And as many before me have said, you can't miss what you've never had.